Hi, I'm Paul Duchesne. Welcome to Mama Paul's Video Podcast. This is part three of New York stories centered on SOHO. And I ended the last story with us just on the edge of SOHO, bringing all these artists in to these lofts. Now, the lofts are a really interesting thing. The lofts are super interesting. Prior to 1969, the Architectural Digest people and your builders and everything had this notion that the cast iron, the manufactured iron that was used for these girders and things like that, that the largest concentration of cast iron was in the left bank in Paris. Paris is known for all of these lofts. And everybody felt like the largest concentration was right there in the left bank in Paris. Well, it wasn't until after 1969 that SOHO started to get developed by the artists, and people started going around the area, realized that, no, it's not there. It's in SOHO in Lower Manhattan. It has a way larger concentration of cast iron than anywhere else on the planet. And in fact, in 1973, they declared it an historical district. So within 4 years from the vote, well, the vote was in 1969, and coincidentally with the vote, I mentioned on the last show that Robert Wagner was the mayor, and he was literally in bed with Robert Moses in their effort to put this throughway across Lower Manhattan. Well, John Lindsey was running for mayor against Robert Wagner. John Lindsey saved Manhattan. He literally saved Manhattan on a number of levels. One with this, the Lower Manhattan Expressway. He was totally against the Lower Manhattan Expressway. He recognized how this was going to wreck the city and wreck this whole area and destroy things. Also, Lindsey is the one who brought the movie industry back into Manhattan. He worked diligently to get the red tape cut, so that you could come in and film in Manhattan and not be burdened with, spending 6 months trying to get a permit to shoot something in the middle of the city. You can thank Lindsey for saving New York back there in 1969. Also, he was involved with there's another story about Stonewall on the west side of Manhattan and the alcohol beverage control, and whether gay people could be in a bar in Manhattan or not. And Lindsey was right in the middle of that controversy too, on the right side of history, as it turns out. So John Lindsey was he was sort of like the Jerry Brown of New York. Let's put it that way. And he was a real gentleman, and he did a lot to save New York City. A lot of people didn't like him. Of course they didn't like him. He went against the establishment in a lot of cases. So anyway, here we have this area, and you've got all this cast iron. Well, these cast iron, they were able to build these 5-story buildings, and with the use of these cast iron girders and arches, they were able to make 1,000-square-foot lofts, which were ideal for people to work in. Right? They weren't like apartments, so you could throw a little bathroom in the corner and a stove and a refrigerator over here. So they had a great big loft with enough to live in it. So it was against the law to have this kind of a living arrangement. Well, Kel surprise. Over the years, when the artists started moving in, they basically made an exception to the rule. Any law that's out there, any rule that's out there, any regimented thing like that ultimately you can change it, break it, or make it something different, depending on how much pressure you get to do it, and depending on who's trying to make the changes. So as the artists are moving into the lofts, they're coming down there and they're producing all this artwork. So all during the early 70s, the brokers are starting to bring the clients down to these lofts to go see the artwork. Well, they don't like getting their feet so dirty. They don't like going in these elevators. They're not crazy about these lofts so much going up to them. They'd really like to be in a nice little gallery. So what happens is they start putting galleries down below on the first floor. So over this next 3, 4, 5 year period, now I left New York in '75, By 73, the galleries were starting to happen below the lofts. So the whole ground level in SOHO started to get taken over with galleries. And the galleries were there for quite a while. Prior to that, you could barely get a cup of coffee down there. Well, then the restaurants started coming in, and then the coffee shops started coming in. Well, now you got the galleries, the restaurants, the coffee shops, the boutiques start coming in. So by the time I'm leaving New York, SOHO is starting to grow and become a pretty decent area to go down to. So much so that by the 80s, Bloomingdales is moving a boutique down there, Louis Vuitton is moving a boutique down there, Tiffany's is moving a boutique down there, all the Richie Rich Fifth Avenue stores are moving little boutiques down there, and ultimately, SOHO winds up replacing Fifth and Madison Avenue as the go-to place to get your art. Unbelievable. The other thing that was really interesting about the neighborhood is, the neighborhood, I said in the other show that there were cobblestone streets down there. Well, they weren't exactly cobblestone. They were actually Belgian blocks, they called them. They were paved with Belgian blocks. And the difference between a cobblestone and a Belgian block is, a Belgian block is specifically cut to an exact size. Cobblestones were sort of not necessarily cut to an exact size, in fact they were arbitrary. They were also made out of granite, and they called them setts, S-E-T-T-S, S-E-T-T-S. So Belgian blocks are called setts. They look like cobblestones, but they're flat, they're neat, and when you put them on the street with the right mortar between them, you wind up having a very smooth surface. And that was the whole point of it. The horses that were in Manhattan in the 1800s the hoofs wouldn't get caught in the cobblestones, because it's almost like having, like a paved street. And that's how this that's why they created these Belgian blocks, not cobblestones. I thought that was a pretty interesting little segue that I found about this whole area. So you got the cast iron district, these huge lofts. Well, back around 1969, 1970, you could have gone down and rented one of these, for maybe $500 a month, something like that. Nowadays, these things are selling for $4 to $5 million. So the neighborhood has been completely transformed and literally gentrified in total. And Jane Jacobs is the one who, during this period from 59 to 69, she is running tours of the area. She's running tours of Greenwich Village, and she's bringing people down into SOHO, showing people these historic buildings that have been there for over 100 years. And she's pointing out their historical significance. She's pointing out the historical significance of the streets. She's having rallies. She's directing people in fact, at one point in 1968, she gets arrested and charged with inciting a riot. She was delivering a speech trying to inspire the people to vote against this and to do everything they could to prevent this throughway from coming through Lower Manhattan. When that happened, and she got arrested for that, she left the country, went up to Canada. That was one reason she went. And the second reason she went was to keep her kid out of the Vietnam War, which was going on full force in 1968. She came back to Manhattan a year or so later without the kid, and her charge was reduced to a misdemeanor, and it didn't go any further than that. So the two things that were happening was Lindsey was opposed to it, and the people voted against it, so it never happened. SOHO becomes this artist refuge, which then becomes a high-class, wealthy, go-to area, which nowadays is literally, it's on tour buses go down there. You can hardly get through Spring Street in the middle of the afternoon. It's like a traffic jam down there. And like I said, what used to be these inexpensive lofts where the poor artists could live are now converted into multi-million-dollar apartments. My friend Anne had a dream of living. She's my Jewish princess friend that we had from Forest Hills, and she always wanted to live south of, in Greenwich Village. She came out here to California in fact, 3 times she came out. I moved her. Once she lived in town here, and twice into North Beach. I was always moving in. Ultimately, she made it back to New York, figured out how to get the job of her dreams, and got an apartment in Greenwich Village with a bicycle on the west side of the village. She never had to go north of 14th Street, so she could stay in this whole area over here. And that was her literal dream, was to stay south of 14th Street and be part of this artistic neighborhood in Lower Manhattan. Now, what the artists were doing, what the people prior to this were doing, and this was one of the little segues I had also. So I said that the SOHO area, this were the people that made sets and did things for the theater community uptown. So if you had a show going on uptown, and you went downtown you needed to get it made, you'd send a runner down to SOHO, they'd make it, you'd maybe have it by the end of the day. They all left here and went over to Brooklyn after 1969. But during this earlier period, and the reason it came up for me about another rabbit hole is there are over 40, I think there's 41 theaters, what are called Broadway theaters in Manhattan. Well, there's way more than 41 theaters in Manhattan. There's a couple of hundred theaters in Manhattan. There's 41 official Broadway theaters. An official Broadway theater is literally 500 seats or more. To be an official Broadway theater is 500 seats or more. An off-Broadway theater is 400 to 500. Off-Broadway, 300 to 400. Off-Broadway, 200 to 300. And off, 100 to 200. So there are 4 offs in the Broadways. Off Broadway theater, 100 to 200 people. In the 60s, you'd get a copy of the Village Voice and look on the back few pages, and you'd have a list of your Broadway theaters, your off-Broadway, your off-Broadway. All of them would be there, and you'd have almost 2 pages of theaters. There's a lot of theater going on in Manhattan on any day of the week. And the designation of the off and the off-offs, if you look it up today, you find out that this designation goes back to around 1960s. And originally in the 60s, there were these 4 offs, off Broadways. Today, there's just Broadway and off-Broadway, according to the Wikipedia. So it's another case where I ran into information that's completely contradictory to what I knew from the 60s, which is now in the Wikipedia today, which is why I have a feeler out to the New York Historical Society to get this book about Jane Jacobs and to get a clarification about these off-Broadway theaters, and to look into a few of these other little rabbit holes that I wound up falling into. But information is getting sort of transmuted as we extend the time. We're almost 15, we're 13 and a half minutes, the last one went over, so I'm going to end it right there. I'm going to finish off part 4 by talking more specifically about Jane Jacobs, period, and I'm going to leave it there. Peace, patience, persistence, and hope to see you for part 4 and more about Jane Jacobs and her influence on the world.